Hi, this is Ray, and today we're coming at you with another episode of Essentials, and today we're talking about the best drip coffee setup for your home. Now, two qualifications of that. Number one, drip coffee just means you have a brewer that drips water over top of beans that you then drink. That's drip coffee. There are different ways of making coffee at home. That's the way I prefer. Second, when I say best, that's very subjective. So for me, this was the best setup. I went pretty much the highest end you could go on a brewer because I felt like that was very important. But I had a grinder that wasn't one of the $2,000 models you could buy. It was in the $200 range. And so people can taste the difference between a $200 grinder and a $2,000 grinder. But for me, I'm not a coffee aficionado. I'm someone who just enjoys a good pot. And for me, that was a great price range. I could taste the difference between a $50 and a $200 grinder because they use different systems, but we'll talk about that when we get to the grinder. But first, we're going to start off by going over the top 4 things you're going to need to make a great cup of coffee. So the 4 things you're going to need when you brew a cup of coffee is number 1, coffee. That's pretty obvious. Number 2, you need a brewer. Number 3, you need a grinder. That's important because the number 1 rule of good coffee is to never, ever, never, never, ever buy pre-ground beans. We'll talk about that later on. And the last thing is you need some way to measure it and drink it. So that's all the accessories that go along with it. We're going to start off with the coffee. So we went with Jamaican Blue for this cup. Now, Jamaican Blue is an expensive coffee. Typically is anywhere from $80 to $100 a pound, and you don't need to go that high end. But if you really want a great cup of coffee, that's pretty much, for me, the best you can buy. Most coffee tastes very similar to me as long as it's the correct roast. Jamaican Blue is one of the few coffees that I can actually drink without having any cream added to it. I can just drink it black. We went with Henry's House of Coffee out of California because you want to make sure that if you're buying an expensive coffee that you have it roasted properly, and Henry's does a great roast of coffee. Plus, there's not many people who actually do Jamaican Blue. And obviously you don't need to spend this much on a coffee. But when you actually break it down, if you're going out to Starbucks every day and getting a cup of coffee, you can actually get nice coffee, brew it at home, and actually save money despite how much you're paying for the pound of coffee. So keep that in mind. If you do a lot of home brewing, you're actually going to spend less than at Starbucks, but have a very good cup of coffee. Now, the important thing is you pick the roast that you want, and you go ahead and grind that coffee properly. So then you got to find a grinder because, again, you never want to have pre-ground coffee. When you fresh ground coffee, it makes sure that all those oils and all those essences come out of it. And that sounds like marketing speak, but it's really not. Again, this is someone who's not a aficionado of coffee, but you can really taste a difference when you have that fresh grind to it. So even if you get a cheaper coffee and you grind it fresh, that's going to taste a lot better than any pre-ground coffee you have on the shelf, no matter how expensive it is, because that coffee's been exposed to air, all those flavors are gone. Make sure you grind it yourself. Now, you can get a cheap grinder. But typically what happens is it doesn't grind properly. They use blades instead of burrs. Now a blade grinder just kind of chops it up and eventually it gets smaller and smaller and then you are able to grind it. A burr grinder gets it a lot finer, a lot more precise. And you don't miss any big chunks like you typically would in that blade grinder, which is almost like a food processor. Now I went with a Breville Smart Grinder Pro. It's about $200. And you can actually measure how much coffee you want out of it. It'll do it automatically. And you can change the grind size. So this will actually do some espresso shots, which require a lot more fine grind. And you can change that and adjust it to the way you like. Now, that grind could change based on the coffee you have, based on how you like the flavors of your end brew. But you want to have one that's adjustable. And that's why we went with the Smart Grinder Pro. And next up is the Mocha Master by Technivorm, and that's the brewer we decided to go with. Now, again, I went with a mid-range grinder. It wasn't the most expensive on the market. There are grinders that are more expensive, but I couldn't really tell the difference. But the Mocha Master is, to me, the top-end brewer that you can buy. Runs around $300 to $320, and it's amazing. I'm going to get away from just having kind of our informational session and just talk about the fact that there's not many things that I really love in my kitchen. There's not many things that stick out where I'm like, wow, this is an awesome piece of machinery. But this is a great brewer. So number 1, it's handmade in the Netherlands. So every unit before you buy it is actually handmade and tested. Everything about it is solid quality. It's actually a matte black metal that the parts are made out of. Has every part of it, it's removable, so you can go ahead and clean it as much as you'd like. You can pull everything off here. And there's a couple different things that are really nice here. So they have the water gets heated, goes up through here, drips over top of the coffee. Once you turn it on, it heats it to the right temperature. Now this one's actually standardized by a European Commission and US Commission for making sure that it has a good cup of coffee. And the important part to it is that it brings the water to the correct level. Too hot or too cold does not make a good cup of coffee. There's all copper elements inside of this that make sure it heats it to the right level, brings it over to your coffee, drips it through, collects it in the carafe, and there's two settings for how hot you want to keep it. So if you're making a large pot of coffee and you don't want to drink it all at once, it'll keep it at a nice temperature. I use the lower setting, keeps it very warm, but it really goes a long time without having that burnt flavor like old coffee often gets. So I can't speak highly enough about the Technivorm Mocha Master. Kind of a funky name. But the look of it, I think, again, it's subjective, but I think it's a very cool looking device, and it's one of those items in my kitchen where I'm excited that it's there. I actually enjoy using it. So that's the Technivorm. But now is the important part. We're going to actually make a cup of coffee with all of this equipment that we went through and purchased. When you're ready to brew, you're going to need a few things. Number one is a filter to make sure all your grinds don't get into your carafe. Next, you're going to need a mug. We went with a Stone & Mill model that's a double-walled carafe, which means there's an air pocket inside that makes sure the outside stays cool to the touch, but the coffee stays nice and warm inside because it's insulated. Make sure you get a good mug. We like the Stone & Mill models. They look good, they feel good, they're a very high-quality product. And then you're going to need a way to measure it. And you can use the built-in measurement system on your grinder. You can go ahead and measure it visually to see how much you like, but if you really want to dial in a good cup of coffee, you want to get a scale and start measuring it out. And you might add a little bit of coffee, subtract a little bit of coffee, depending on how you like it. But you want to kind of nail down how much coffee you want to use inside your pot. We went with a scale, S-K-A-L-E, and it's a very precise scale that measures down to the 0.1 gram setting, so you can actually really narrow it in very tight. And so now we're gonna brew a pot and see how it turns out. So we're gonna start off by putting our measurement cup right on top of the scale. We're gonna zero it out, which means it doesn't weigh the cup. And I'm gonna measure out, I'm gonna do 3 cups of coffee. And I'm gonna measure out around 30.2 grams of beans. I went a little bit much there. And again, the key is, to me, this makes a good cup of coffee from what I found from these beans. And, oh, perfect, 30.2. From these beans and from this brewer. So we measured out the 30.2 grams, and I'm going to dump it into our grinder here. Pull out the filter. And for this, typically when you have the smart grinder, you can go ahead and have it automatically grind for you. I'm just going to go ahead and do it manually because I measured out how much I actually want inside of my coffee. And so we're going to just let it roll. Typically, if you do 6 cups of coffee, it's going to take you about 30 seconds to grind. This should take me, that's a little bit longer than I thought. We're hitting 22 right now, 24, 25, okay. So it's starting to get empty there, and that is some nice, freshly ground coffee. I gotta tell you, I mean, it just smells good. So we're gonna take off the top here, so we can go ahead and load in our grinds. That's just going to fall right inside of there. We're going to replace this. And I'm actually going to leave that off so I can show you what happens when the water comes through. We're going to pull the top off here, and we're going to go ahead and put some water in. So we have some fresh water here. Going to pour it in, and I'm going about 3 cups. There we go. So that's about 3 cups worth for the 30.2 grams of coffee. Cover this back up, and with the Technivorm, all you do is flip it on, and it's going to start warming up the water and going through and falling into the drip part over the top. Now this will usually take about 3 to 4 minutes, so we're not going to bore you with the whole thing. So through the magic of camera work, we're going to skip through and show you what happens when this starts bubbling. So there, the water is coming up through the top of the brewer, and you can see here that it's starting to drip over top of the coffee. Now that's going to form what's called the bloom on top, which makes sure the flavors start coming out, and the water is just going to sit in there and drip through and eventually start coming down here. And then eventually this will be filled up with hopefully delicious coffee. All right, so we're back. Now that in actuality took about 2.5 minutes to make that entire pot of coffee, but now it's done. So the coffee's been brewed. Now's the fun part, actually drinking it. So I'm gonna pull the carafe off. I'm going to pour it into my doubled wall carafe. And as you can see here, when you have a nice double-walled carafe, it gives you kind of a cool effect as well, so you can see the coffee levitating inside. And now I'm going to try my cup of Henry's Jamaican Blue, made on a Technivore Mocha Master using a Breville Smart Grinder. And as I say all that, I just want to be very clear about the fact that we were not paid for any of these things. We chose these items because we think they're the best for us. Again, subjective term, but we really like the coffee that comes from it, and there is no money exchanged for us promoting this. But let's try this cup of coffee and see how it is. It's a good cup of coffee. It's warm. It's very warm. It's about 180 degrees, but the mug keeps it nice and cool on the outside. That's a good cup of coffee. So thank you for watching. We appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful to you. We're not coffee aficionados. We aren't going to spend $2,000 on a grinder. People who do that, Godspeed to you. I'm glad that you can taste the difference to it. We couldn't. This system works really well for us. It makes a great cup of coffee, and I can't stress enough, if you're spending all that money at Starbucks every day, stop and buy a home brewer. Make it in the morning, take it with you. You can get good coffee, ground properly. It's actually a fun process to do. It's a nice relaxing morning activity, and when you do it, it's going to save you money in the long term, and it's going to give you a great cup of coffee every day. So thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in another episode of Essentials coming at you soon.